was right, this was before Thun Field was here in the 30s. We put that strip in, and it's located here's a Walmart right in there, and this strip was right in this location right there. He wanted to have a crop dumpster operation there to support the valley farmers. And in 1949, John Thun started the development of Thun Field here, and he built a house there on Thun Field and raised his family. And that house became the airport office, which was Bruce Thun's bedroom for all those years. So right next to the building, another little shop was made, a little coffee shop were there, and they served hamburgers and coffee and donuts. And the old coffee shop was a gathering point of old airport bums, and there was always something interesting going on there. Like you might walk in and find a guy with a coffee cup in one hand and a paintbrush in the other hand, to open a rudder or an elevator right there in the coffee shop. So it was really a neat place, always something going on here, and that was in the 60s. So in 69, the founders, because there was a lot of activity in the Pacific Northwest of home builds and antique airplanes, as it is today. And this is a very popular airport in the area for that activity. So these guys decided in 1969 to form an EAA chapter. And 1969, the summer of 1969, was actually the last year that EAA convention was held in Rockford, Illinois. And 1970 was the very first year at Whitman Field, Oshkosh. So now that they have a gathering of members here, they needed a place to meet. So they decided to, the only place that really was available to them was the S&S field right here. And Bud Blanchard lived there in a little house there, and there was a little hangar there. And so the meetings were held there, and he had an old hangar with a wood stove in there, and that's where the meetings were held. And the chapter decided to have a chapter project, and there's Bud Blanchard there in the early. So they decided to have build a project, which was the Baking Deuce. Now the Baking Deuce was a neat little airplane, a two-place high wing, and the members gathered up materials and bought a welding outfit, which is in our tool group, by the way, and they started to build the Baking Deuce. Now, you see that windsock there, or that wing tee, that's still out there in the field. That's how old this thing was. So this airplane that Bud built here with that 40-horse Mercury outboard motor, I can't remember if it flew and how well it flew, but I remember him saying that he had a lot of problems keeping the belts on, because that was a long stretch from the engine down here all the way up to the prop shaft.
I can guarantee it flew when I saw it, but not very well.
Not very well. Not very well. So the chapter started building the Baking Deuce. That's the Baking Deuce. That's an example of one. They built they had the fuselage pretty well welded up, and I think the wings were pretty well along, and they kind of got burned out because only a couple of guys were starting to work on it, and so that they kind of dropped the project. And so the project was sold, and in the 70s, this
You going the wrong way?
this field here was, this property here was sold, and so Bud had to move someplace else. He moved to Eatonville, where he started his business. And so that project was sold, and so the property was sold, and so needed another meeting place. And there was a lot of the chapter members were, we went on chapter visits to projects. And one of those projects was, one of the members was building a coop. And so we visited that project, and he finally, he finished the project, and the members helped the owner bring it out to the field here for taxi tests. And the owner went out on the patch, or went out on the runway, did a high-speed taxi, and he got airborne unexpectedly. And he continued on the patch and landed and taxied to the ramp, where he was greeted by and congratulated by some of the chapter members. But he collapsed with a heart attack right there and died next to his airplane. It was a sad affair. The chapter's always had a lot of interesting members and a lot of interesting airplanes. And over the years, there was one individual, he was really quite a guy, Merle Replico. And this was another plane that he built. He had a hangar over there. It was one of the county hangars. And that was an ultralight before anybody knew what an ultralight was back then. And he called it the Gold Bug. And it went through 3 different engine configurations. It was really a crude airplane, and he was not a real, it wasn't real show quality, but anyway, he got things done. He was a doer, he was a builder, and he always brought things that he worked on to chapter meetings for show and tell. He always had something to show. And the first time I saw the airplane, it was before this, I think, he had a couple Briggs & Stratton engines on a 2x6 across the longeron and bolted to a couple Briggs & Stratton. And it didn't work too good. So then he finally went to these go-kart engines. And you see that he had a problem with, he broke a shaft, and that propeller almost went into his seat there. And so he changed the engines around so they were tractor engines. He had all 3. This was another, he modified it, put the engine around for tractor engines, and the 3 engines. And he had rope starters up in the instrument panel, and they looked like, it reminded me of 3 fire handles on a 727, He had one for each pull starter for each engine. So he kept working on that, and he had an engine failure, and he went down in the brush and tree area over where Clover Park is right now. And John Shell saw him go down over there. He jumped in his helicopter and flew over there to see if Merle was all right. Merle was fine, but John couldn't land a helicopter. There was no place to set it down. Well, Merle, he got down low. Merle grabbed the whole of the skid, hung onto it, and John drug him off, flew him over here, and dropped him off the ramp. So, the third engine configuration was the one you see, well, this was the, another configuration where he modified the fuselage here, streamlined the engines, and, it flew much better, and modified the gear and so forth. He was always working on something. He designed this himself. And, then, the last configuration was this one up here with a Volkswagen, 36 horse Volkswagen engine on it. And that engine, that configuration, he flew to Oshkosh. And, they wanted to run him off the field. And, because his workmanship was definitely not up to Oshkosh standards. And all of a sudden, the officials there said, well, wait a minute. This is what EAA is all about. Innovation, experimentation. And by the way, he flew it all the way here. So they let him stay. So, like I say, the meeting place had to be moved because the property was sold across the meridian there. And so it was, there was a building that was on the field here early on, a 2-story building, and it was moved over into the woods. Move over to the woods, right, it's not very hard, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a bunch of woods right here between the airport property fence and Meridian. And that building was moved right into this area right here. So the chapter was having meetings in that location for a number of years. And it was down to just a handful of members at that time. Russell was their president at that time, and his dad was Admiral Russell, in charge of the Aleutian Island naval operation during World War II. At that time, early on, the chapter president was the finance officer, the program director, and he also brought the donuts. Russell got sick and died along with the chapter. After his death, I went to the old building and removed this founder's plaque that was up on the wall there. And some of these members, most of these members have gone west, but Bud Blanch was on here, and I showed us one of his projects. There was Barbara Kuhn, David Kuhn, and Merritt Kuhn. And
Sold them half.
they had I believe it was a Whitman tailwind. And they flew it to,
It was a Cougar.
was it a Cougar?
I flew that airplane.
They flew to Oshkosh,
He dumped it like.
and him and his son were flying over Lake Michigan, and they ran into a problem and went into the lake, and I don't think they ever found him.
He found his son.
They did find his
They
son.
didn't find Barrett.
Yeah. So, Fred Lichtke, he had a clip wing monocoque. He was a air show performer. He did really a nice aerobatic routine throughout the country. He toured the country with that clip wing monocoque. And Fred, I think he's still with us. He lives up at Whidbey Island, I believe it's up there. I think he's still with us. Matter of fact, a couple of years ago, he stopped by our campsite at Arlington and said hello. Let's see, there was another one here. I didn't know most of these. I think they pretty much have all gone west. But we had a lot of a lot of talent, right from the beginning, as we do now. So after meeting over in the building back in the woods over there, we met there a few years, and after I retrieved this, the chapter kind of dried up, and I went to the building and retrieved this plaque off the wall and took it home, and not too long after that, I got a call from the hangar end manager, and they said that our old building had burned to the ground. The transients went over there and burned it up. That was a building that was also shared by the Western Travel Airs.
They're the ones that built it right out front on this concrete slab that's out here.
That's where it was.
That's where it
Yeah.
was.
And there was Western Travel Airs was a flying club here, and they shared the building with the chapter. So that took care of the meeting place, and I got a call from the hangar end manager and said we could use their banquet room for meetings if we wanted to. I thought that was pretty nice of them. But Bruce also said that, well, we could use the office meeting room there. So we decided maybe that would be a good thing. So I got a list of EA members in our area from Oshkosh headquarters and sent out postcards, which was, by the way, our first newsletter, postcards. And the meetings were held at the airport office building. A few years that the meeting room became too small, and President Bob Fay at that time negotiated the use of the Civil Air Patrol building that's where we're in today. There were a lot of special guests and speakers over the years, interesting, and we still have them once in a while and programs, and some of the by the way, that Coot had folding wings. It was pretty much all wood design. It was quite a neat airplane. I don't know what happened to it.
Part of that airplane was built in my metal shop.
Yeah. So one of our guest speakers was Lamar Steen. He was the designer of the Skybolt, and he came out here. He was out here from Colorado, and we had a couple examples that were built right locally. Bob Fay built one, and also there was another gentleman a little farther south here had built one too. One of the other guests we had was one of the last Tuskegee Airmen. He talked about his experiences as a Tuskegee Airman, and very interesting program that he presented. One of the other guests that we had, speaker, was Ed Saylor. He was in ship number 15, taking off the USS Hornet on the way to Tokyo. He talked about his experiences after they crashed out of fuel. One other person that was, he was in town, Bob Hoover was in town, and he was staying in a hotel in Fife, and he couldn't make our meeting, so some of our chapter members went and visited with him at the hotel, which was a real treat to talk with Bob. Another guest speaker we had was Pete Bowers, and some of the early, before Chapter 326 was developed, all it was Chapter 26, and Chapter 26 met in Pete Bowers' garage in Des Moines, Washington, and that's where that chapter met, and that's where the Flybabe was built, and that's where Shamu, that other airplane that he built. And Pete talked about the early days here, about home building and some of the antique airplanes that were restored, which the chapter members, both their chapter members and our chapter members, have done tremendous jobs in constructing these airplanes and resurrecting them, and a lot of them have been award-winning airplanes. So we can be proud of what is developed out of these chapters. And one of the last things I would like to see that to celebrate our 50th birthday would be to have our chapter have our 50th birthday in our own facility. That would be something I'd really like to see. I think it's possible. This is a builders group. This is a can-do group. So there you have it. Happy birthday, boys and girls, and keep on building.